Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am Janice Franklin, and you may know me or heard of me as the Child Support Concierge. And I thank you for just being here to learn more about the Spy Inside Child Support cheat codes. And let's get into it because your time is valuable, and I want to make sure that you can quickly take this information, cop the book, and start applying it ASAP. So, um, child support, why is this such an important topic? The reason being is because our society is built on this kind of like get back mentality. And what a lot of people don't realize is that when you're an average citizen or civilian that is trying your best to live and exist in this world and you're dealing with trauma and breakups and all these different types of things, the last thing you need is the system to come in to make that worse. And a lot of people don't realize that when they decide to involve the system into their problems, that's exactly what they're doing. They're basically making the situation worse instead of trying to exhaust all possible resources before involving the system. And once the system gets involved, we don't always know the depth of how much that will impact the situation in a negative way before it will a positive way. So I'm hoping that with this information, it will encourage you to think outside the box as far as trying to find solutions to your own issues before involving the system and the courts and all that, because the courts are part of the system, if you don't know, as we all should know by now. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Just to give you a little background about myself, I originally have a background in hospitality and special events, but when I relocated across country, I ended up going into social services. And like most people are encouraged to do, you get that government job so you can get those benefits and you can get that pension and retire. And although that wasn't my main reasoning, I had to survive. So I used my degree and my career, then over a decade in customer relations, and I got a job in child support services, particularly enforcement. So I was a child support enforcement specialist for 7.5 years, which means that I specifically enforced child support orders. So not only did I investigate and find out information about both parties, but I found them, I found income, I enforced those orders. Sometimes that meant levying bank accounts, that meant having to call people in some of the most difficult times and have really, really hard, difficult conversations with them. And whether they were the ones paying or the ones receiving, again, the matter is just so sensitive that it automatically has a a burden. It has a heaviness to it that a lot of people don't want to acknowledge, and that's why people are. This is such a touchy subject. So, along with that, I am the product of a unwed couple having a child. My father was absent, and at the moment where my mother could have chose to involve the courts and basically bring that whole drama into my life as well as her own, she chose another way. And it ended up benefiting me, though I was raised by my great grandparents, and I had a single mother and our relationships were strained over throughout my childhood. It was way better than what it could have been had I been back and forth in courts, being used as a pawn to spite him and all this. And that perspective allowed me to be a neutral participant in this whole process and got me to learn what I know today. So, um, one of the things I want to do is by the time we end tonight, and I definitely won't keep you long, but before you leave here, I hope that you walk away with some clarity, some confidence, and the beginnings of a strategy where you and your other parent or whoever else you are raising children with can figure out a way to create common ground where you both can not only exist and just survive with each other, but really thrive and actually grow with each other and be an example that our children need. We see so much going on in the world with our young children just being out here in the streets, just wilding, and that's because they seeing that wilding going on at home. And if we can smooth out those conflicts and show them another way, then perhaps they'll move differently, you know. So, one of the first things I would ask you, as you are hearing this information, is to think about where you are in your child support journey, whether you're thinking about separating from your co-parent, or if you are currently co-parenting because you've already separated, whether through divorce or mutually or whatever, or if you're already in the system, you could already have an open child support case right now, or be with somebody who has a case. Because all of these different places that you can be in your journey definitely make a difference in how this system is impacting you. But most of all, it also can give you insight on how you need to proceed in order to change your situation for the better and not the worse. So let's talk about the problem. The problem is that the system is intentionally confusing, it's intentionally costly, and it is intentionally emotional because playing on the emotions of people that are in the midst of unresolved trauma makes them vulnerable to be able to take advantage of, which means that you have one party where you're playing on that vulnerability and you're coaxing them into doing things that, while they think is helping them in the long run, is really not only putting them in a disadvantaged position, but it's also making a conflict worse than it has to be. Then also you have the other side of that where, before you're even given a chance to really like show up on your own, it's being forced upon you. And non-compliance can mean ruining the destruction of your entire livelihood. Um, Most people also don't know that they have rights. A lot of times there's information that is not freely given the way it's supposed to be. There shouldn't be information that one party gets to have and the other party doesn't. It all should be open for everybody to be able to access because everybody should know what they're getting into before they sign those papers, whether it's filling out an application or applying for social services. The Not knowing what your rights are means that you could be signing away big time and not even know it. So, and that is some of the biggest mistakes that I see parents making is that they're making decisions from emotion instead of logic. Um, and not only are they not dealing with the emotion, but they are also just making the situation worse, not only for themselves, but for the innocent children who have no control in what's going on. Um, so, that being said, with the second question I asked you, what is your biggest struggle right now? For some, the biggest struggle is communication and conflict resolution because you have this breakup, whether it's just a separation or it's a divorce, but that unresolved trauma remains, especially if you don't do the internal inner shadow work that you need to do on an individual level after something like that. And most of the time, parents are not doing that work. You may have one parent who is doing the work and the other one isn't. And that, of course, makes the one that is healing their journey even more of a struggle because, the one that is unhealed is continuing to cause havoc. So, when we get to a place where both parents are willing to do that work, that's where you get to a place where you can be more, you can figure out a way to thrive instead of just survive and, continue to fight each other. Another struggle you may have is the money and the financial uncertainty. Um, Again, it's all about how you approach things. If you approach things from a scarcity mindset, then you're going to be all about competition. You're going to be all about, I need to make this person pay for this, or I'm not going to give because I don't want this person to do this, and that. It's all a control game. And who loses in the end? The child. The child always ends up the loser, regardless of which side thinks they're winning. The child is the one losing because both of you are fighting, and most of the time you forget about them in the midst of the fight. Legal confusion, again, um, a lot of there's so much legal jargon used that is purposely used to confuse people who don't know. What Nobody wants to use the plain language because then once you realize what's really going on, you may think twice about it, and you may say, "Oh, no, I don't want to do that." But you saying no, you don't want to do that kind of doesn't fit into their plans when the system is profiting off of certain actions and certain non-actions. And that confusion of not knowing your rights allows people to move in a way that they're just ruled by emotion and they don't even know where to start to figure out the proper process. The emotional stress. Um, Even though you may think the stress of the parent that is ordered to pay support is obvious, they have these restrictions on them, and they are being watched and their money's being taken and all this and that, and they're ordered to pay. The person that is receiving support, there's emotional stress there too. There's in and out of court, there's the you know having to, depending on what your situation is, the stress of having to do the back and forth because the burden is going to be on you, regardless of what any child support agency says. The bulk of the work that it's going to take in order for your case to move or progress is going to be put on the parent that's receiving the support. They're receiving the support. They're going to ask you to find out information about the other parent. They're gonna, so that they can verify it. They make you do the legwork and then they just call the follow up, and it's like, and I've heard it plenty of times. Why are you asking me for this when you are the agency and that's supposed to be what you do? But again, that's emotional stress. I mean, if you're trying to be done with a breakup or whatever and trying to move on with your life, but yet you're in the courts trying to fight and they're asking you to find out where they work at and, where they live at and all that, like that's counterproductive to what you're trying to do. So again, in all of this emotional stress, we're not even touching what the child is going through, the back and forth, the being used as a pawn. Tell your daddy this, tell your mama that. You know, this is not their concern. It shouldn't be. And that emotional stress just pours out on them, and there's nothing they can do about it. So, so let's talk about my breaking point. I, in my role as a child support enforcement specialist, I always saw that there wasn't enough. effort in reconciliation being done in the process. I came across a lot of cases where there were parents who were actually talk to each other, that actually work together, that have talked on the side and said, yes, the child support amount can be this amount, and the other parent is paying it faithfully. There's no harm, no foul. Visitation is happening smoothly, but yet because the court in the system is involved, you have restrictions placed on that other parent, like they have a hard month or their situation, some kind of obstacle come in their situation, that they are trying to deal with could end up throwing off their payment history, causing them to become non-compliant, and then a whole bunch of enforcement actions take place, from denial of a driver's license to, bad credit reporting, to then whatever savings or nest egg or whatever you were trying to create could be touched, especially if you have savings that's tied to you. So not to mention your tax return. So all of these things, it just shows you how the system is tied together. The system has access to all these things, but don't get it twisted. They don't just have that access against that person with the order. They have that access against the person with receiving support too. Like, you, especially if you're receiving any type of monetary assistance or social aid, like, oh, oh. um, that means that you are locked in a certain income level. So if you start making a certain amount of money, because we all should be wanting to be gainfully, have gainful income, and be able to support ourselves. But if you're relying on a system to do that, then they're going to lock you into where they want you to be. Most of the time, that's poverty level. And the moment that you go over that, you're getting sanctioned. Not to mention the fact that I wouldn't want to have these people in my business, and having to tell them my every single move and every single thing I'm doing, regardless of what's going on. So when I made attempts to bring the idea of mediation into the child support process, meaning that parents that were able to work together would be able to mediate in such a way where the enforcement actions were removed off of the parent who is basically in compliance. And the fact that they are working together, the system, the only thing you need to do is process the payment. Just be, and that is a no touch thing. Like, the payment comes in, then it goes to the other parent. Like, that's all that needs to be present in that type of situation. And the reason why the system doesn't want this and doesn't like this is because you can do that with Zelle. You can do that. Yeah, pause. Can you hear me? Yo, well, I'm at 10%, and it started like